Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and it's another exciting day on the channel here because I get to introduce you to another brand new product. If you are watching this on November 6th, 2025, then you are also watching this on the first day that you can buy the brand new HEDD 1. This is a new dynamic driver open back headphone from Heinz Electrodynamic Designs, or HEDD. It costs $799 US or 699 euros. This unit was sent to me directly from HEDD for review. They have asked nothing in exchange other than a fair and honest evaluation, and for me to release this review video today, November 6th, 2025. It is not clear to me whether this headphone is a loan or if I will get to keep it. I have been able to keep HEDD units in the past, so it is a possibility, but regardless, you have my pledge to be as honest and as straightforward about this product as I possibly can be. If any retailers out there end up selling this headphone, for whom I am also an affiliate link partner, I will put affiliate links down in the description where you can buy this headphone and label them as such. Any such links, if you use them to buy this product because you like what I say about it and you want to buy this and also help support the channel, if you use one of those links, I will get a small kickback, and that helps me keep doing all of this stuff that I am doing here. All right. This headphone is innovative in a sense because there's some new driver diaphragm material technology inside here. This is also a departure from HEDDs of old. HEDD is well known for their ribbon-style transducers. This is a dynamic driver, so that's different, that's exciting, and this also falls into the somewhat busy category of $500 to $1,000 US headphones, so we need to talk about where it fits into the market there. All of that and more right on the other side of shameless self-promotion.
Hi, it's me again, 14 months later and a whole foot taller. Now, since Wave Theory liked the first 10,000 subscriber play button I made him, maybe he wants a 25,000 subscriber play button. This can only happen if you subscribe though. Now, since over 60% of the watch time comes from unsubscribed viewers, I'm gonna need you to subscribe. You can also sign up for his Patreon or send him money in PayPal. Links in the description. Now, on to the video.
Alright, as usual, there is a lot of ground to cover here, particularly when you're talking about a brand new product that not many know very much about. So I'm going to be quite thorough here, take my time. I will timestamp out this video. You can jump around and watch the parts that are of most interest and relevance to you. My general takeaway here on the D1 is it is quite good. I enjoyed listening to it quite a bit, and what I'm about to tell you I do not take lightly because a lot of this claim has been made. It's rarely ever been true to my ears. So, what is that claim? I think ultimately this headphone, the D1 here, is very much a spiritual successor to the Sennheiser HD650 or the mass drops variant, the HD6XX. I have a 6XX right here. Why do I say that? Well, because as I was listening to the D1 and comparing it to other headphones, it really started to occur to me that this has a lot of the tonal qualities and the presentational qualities of the HD650/6XX, but improves upon the kind of, at this point, well-known deficiencies of the 650/6XX as well. So that's why I call it a spiritual successor. It really does remind me a lot of ways of this HD6XX headphone, but it improves upon the weaknesses that this headphone has while doing it, and that is some pretty high praise, so I kind of want to frame this review in that direction. Now, I have asked Dr. Frederick Knopp, or Freddy, over at HEDD there, if they designed the D1 with the intent of it being quite similar to the HD650, yet addressing and fixing some of its deficiencies. I haven't heard back yet on that, but I also just sent that email about 3 hours before I started filming this video because of the needing to release this, doing a day and date evaluation here. I needed to turn this around pretty quickly. So if I get a response before the public release of this video on that question, I will summarize it and put it down in the comments below. So look for that there. Okay. Other than that, we're just going to dive right in with everything here. So a couple of the basics about the D1 here is, as I said, it is a dynamic driver headphone, which is a departure from HEDD's approach of the past with their ribbon designs that came from the Headphone, the Headphone 2, and the Headphone 2 GT. I have reviewed all three of those models there. Please see links down in the description if you want to learn more about those designs as well. All right, so then about the D1. Again, they are, according to the press release information that I was given on here that I can now share today, the target price for this headphone is $799 US or 699 euro. They do say that any kind of value added taxes, since we live in a day of tariffs now here in late 2025, are included if you buy in Europe, but not if you buy in the United States. So that's something to keep in mind there. Okay, but some other specs on this headphone here. The dynamic driver that is in it is rated at 32 ohms of impedance with 100 decibel sensitivity. It is not specified in their literature whether that's 100 decibels per milliwatt or 100 decibels per millivolt. My listening tests and swapping between amplifiers suggests to me that it is in fact 100 decibels per milliwatt, because this headphone is on the more sensitive and easier driving side. Okay, beyond that, the new dynamic drivers that are in here, I mentioned that they have a new diaphragm material technology, and that is called thin ply carbon. So it's very much like a carbon fiber, if I understand HEDD's literature on this, but it is in a like super advanced space-agey kind of carbon fiber that is often found on like F1 racing cars and is also used in NASA's Mars helicopter on there. So like literally some space-age technology kind of stuff going on there. And of course, as with any new driver tech, what they are going for here and what they think they have achieved and why they thought it was worthwhile bringing that material to the market in a driver like this is because they believe they've hit something that's different about the stiffness to mass ratio of that driver so that it can move in response to the changing electromagnetic fields that are the waveforms of our music moving in electromagnetic form there. Just the stiffness and the lightness of it means that it, again, can more accurately respond in theory, or respond in a way that's a little bit different, in a way that's pleasing, okay, whatever the case may be, as opposed to other types of driver tech and driver membrane materials. All right, the proof on that is in the listening first and maybe the measurements, although I don't do measurements here, but I'm sure somebody somewhere also out there today is releasing frequency response graphs and all of that kind of stuff that you can look at. I do not have a measurement rig, so everything that I say about the tonality here is going to be by ear. Stay tuned here in just a moment. Stay tuned. Haha. Anyway. Moving on then, despite that cheesy dad joke that I am sorry not sorry for, what I did next is I filmed a clip where I did an overhead view and showed you a more close-up build of this headphone. Given how new that it is, I thought that that would be a worthwhile thing to do. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. All right, given the newness of the D1 here, I thought we would do a quick close-up of its build, just to kind of give you an idea of what it's like here. Okay, so mostly basically a matte black plastic construction here, and to me, plastic is fine. Plastic can last a long time. Ask the Sennheiser HD600 and HD650 series. Okay, I don't have a problem there. However, you do see, and you can like kind of tell that like the plastic here, it just gets smudgy with fingerprints and just general, you know, filth on it due to use and that sort of thing. That does happen. All right, pads, micro perforated. Oh shoot, what is this material? It feels like velour. Okay, I'd have to look it up. I can put it up on the screen there. Okay, but you can see lots of little micro perf going on there, and it is everywhere. Okay, we have a grill on the back, and look what they did here. Even though it's a dynamic driver, you see that little, like, part over the back of the driver back down inside there. It kind of looks reminiscent of HEDD's ribbon-style drivers, the way that those look there on the back there. So we have head size adjustment there. Okay, you can see it actually will get rather large. Okay, that stays in place reasonably well, I've found. The headband is also like, it's got this nice notch here on the top, so I never noticed any hot spots or anything. This is not as soft as you think it is. It's certainly not as soft as these very plush pads here, but I never had any issues with comfort nonetheless. One thing I want to point out, both on the pads here and then also on the headband, you can really see it on the headband, is they tend to get fuzzies and all of that kind of stuff just stuck to them all the time. So neat freaks who are OCD about that sort of thing, this headphone might drive you a little bit nuts, okay, with that kind of stuff. I mean, you can just see just everything just kind of clings right to it there, okay? Let's see what else we have here. We see that the pads have a little bit of a forward angle to them. Again, just stuff clinging, a little bit of dog hair there for you, courtesy of my border jack. Okay. And then again, you can kind of see like the fingerprint smudgies going on there again. All right. Dual 3.5 millimeter cup entry on the cabling right there. This is the stock cable. It is nothing special. I don't even know if I used it. You get 3.5 millimeter TS on the headphone end. You get 6.35 millimeter screw-on adapter here with 3.5 millimeter TRS. Okay, single-ended underneath that. I have so many aftermarket dual 3.5 cables anymore. I just ended up using an assortment of those when I listened to this. Anyway, but yeah, there it is. There's the build and all of that. It does make a little bit of noise. Okay? What you hear, like, if I'm here, there's like no squeak. That noise that you heard was the restriction on the movement this way. That's the only time you really hear noise, as long as I don't hit that. Okay? It's like dead silent. Just a little bit of creak on that motion there. Okay. But yeah, that's nice. I didn't notice any microphonics or all that. Again, I used aftermarket cables mostly, and so the headphone itself does not seem particularly sensitive to microphonics, if that is the case for you. It is 350 grams. It is actually quite comfortable on the head. I never had any comfort issues with this at all. The pads, again, are nice and soft. They conform to the head. The opening here, the ear opening size might be a little bit on the small side. I didn't have any problems with that, but of course that's always a your mileage may vary type of thing. But yeah, there you go. A little bit of an up-close view of the build. All right, let me come back real quick to those closing comments I made there about comfort. You see that it is on my head right now, and I gotta say this is a quite comfortable headphone here for the most part. The clamp force strikes a nice balance between like keeping it on the head well, it doesn't really move around, versus being too much. Like it's not too clampy. I think for my head it strikes a nice balance there. Of course, with all of those fit and comfort things, it's going to very much be a your mileage may vary kind of aspect here, but I find it quite comfortable. The weight of it is nice. It's pretty light. It's not the lightest headphone I've ever used. Like for example, the recent Audio-Technica flagship of the HEDD650 is lighter than this one, but it's still not bad, right? It's not bad at all. Okay. So that's that. Let's start turning our attention then to the performance of the headphone, what it sounds like, and of course, to do that, I need to give you an idea of the context and the systems, the signal chains that I used to test this. So, test gear. What are we looking at here? All digital music files for me. So either lossless or high-res FLAC files or DSD files played locally through Roon. In the case of FLAC files, they could have also been streamed from Qobuz. All right, Roon endpoints include a Windows 11 laptop computer, an Asus ZenBook that I connected via USB here through a JDS Labs Synapse, okay, which I've gotten in for review, and I'm working on what those are like. But anyway, through a JDS Labs Synapse little USB cleaner-upper deal, okay, USB isolator thing. I'm sure neither of those is the correct term, but I will fix that. Okay. And then into the USB input of a shit Mimir DAC, and then RCA outputs there into a shit Asgard X headphone amplifier. I also checked just out of curiosity. I used the pre-out from that Asgard X into the shit Valhalla 3 OTL tube amp to drive this as well. So that was one signal chain kind of all there as well. Another Rune endpoint would have been a FIO SR11 streamer, USB output from that into FIO's K13 R2R little DAC amp with the R2R DAC in it. That is also currently being powered by a FIO PL50 linear power supply in there. And then I used just the headphone output, the 4.4 millimeter headphone output through a variety of different aftermarket cables here into the D1 as well. So that was another signal chain. I also tried again as a Rune endpoint, the Cord 2 Go through a 2U DDC and then USB output from that into the Unison 384 USB input of the shit Gungnir 2 DAC, and then balanced XLR outputs from that into the new Ane N7 headphone amplifier, which is also in for review. Again, 4.4 millimeter Penacon output, headphone output of that into through various aftermarket cables into the D1 here. Okay, then I also tried it on a much more high-end system on another listening rack here where Rune endpoints would have been a Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer through a Vice Engineering INT204 digital-to-digital converter, then AES output from that into my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC, and then XLR output from that into Violectric's HPA V324 headphone amplifier, which is, as you guessed it, in for review. Okay, I also tried the Sonor Optical Rendu direct USB output from that into the USB input of a Lampezator Baltic 3 DAC into that same Violectric HPA V324 amplifier as well. Okay, so that is a wide range of signal chains here. I should also say that Dr. Knopp, or Freddy, gave me a demo of the D1 here at CanJam SoCal back in September of 2025. And at the show there, I was able to power this directly off of, I believe it was even the single-ended output of an iBasso DX180 DAP, or digital audio player. Now, that was in the main showroom. This is open back. It was quite noisy in there, but I can say that that little DAP, from its lower powered single-ended output than its 4.4 millimeter output, was able to get sufficiently loud for me to at least sort of kind of get an idea of what this headphone sounds like, which just brings me back to the idea that this is a relatively easy to drive headphone. You do not need a ton of amplifier power to drive it properly. Okay, what did I find through all of that? All right, and this comes back to the framing that I led the review with here, is that in many ways I found the D1 to sound like a spiritual successor to the HD650, okay, the legendary Sennheiser HD650. And that's because it is a mostly neutral tuning that is tilted slightly warm right there, okay? So it is like most people are going to put this headphone on their head and like they're going to notice the warmth in its sound there. It has decent, though not class-leading, bass extension towards the low end. And then again, it also has decent, but not class-leading extension up in the treble through the air frequencies as well in there. There is a slight high-frequency roll-off to it. Okay, not as much as an HD650, for example, okay, but it does seem to have a little bit of roll-off below what I think most people would consider true neutral up in the treble range. So then there is, it seems like, just a slight bump in the upper bass, lower mids, that where that warmth region is. So the combination of that like slight upper bass, lower mid bump and that slight air frequency roll-off to it, all all of that comes together to give an overall tonality that is within the range that most people are going to call neutral, but tilting warm. So call it neutral warm in there. All right, so then when we start looking at the technicality or like the tonal balance of all of that there, like what I was struck by here, particularly in the treble, is how smooth the treble is. The relationships between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics seems pretty accurate, fairly spot on and realistic there, and there is a smoothness and a refinement to the treble here that kind of belies the price, honestly. It is quite silky smooth through the treble and all that, which was really nice to hear. This headphone is very rarely ever sharp or sibilant. It sounds cliche to say this, I realize, but it is only sharp and sibilant when the track, the program material, is sharp and sibilant. But even in that case, when the program material is itself sibilantly recorded, okay, there is a grace to the delivery here, which means that it almost always stops short of being piercing to me. One example that I can think of is the Alanis Morissette track, You Oughta Know. For whatever reason, the way they recorded that song, her delivery through the chorus on like S and T sounds is very sharp, very aggressive, can be quite piercing at times. And you can tell through this headphone that that's the way it was recorded, that it is sounding sharp and sibilant, and whatever they did to the sound there, they just didn't get it quite right on her vocal delivery of those S's and T sounds. Okay, but it does it with a grace and a smoothness that it doesn't really get fatiguing. I have heard that track on other headphones turn into absolute ear daggers. And this one is just like, hey, yeah, they didn't quite get that right. But it doesn't turn into a piercing, tiring mess either. So there was a grace to that I appreciated on a lot of poorly recorded tracks. Okay. Now, that was not in a sacrifice of detail, which we'll come back to in a little bit here. I think that really is, they struck a really good balance of the tonality and the presence through the treble regions that allowed for that smoothness and refinement and grace, frankly, there through that range. Okay, the mid-range is also, again, well tonally balanced. Really no semblance of shout or honk to my ears that are very sensitive to shoutiness and honkiness. Nice and smooth, pretty realistic tone and timbre through the mid-range that I thought was also a fairly standout trait there. Okay, there is a little bit more presence in the upper mids here than, say, the Senn HD650 has. So I would say spiritual successor to the 650 here. We'll get to this a little bit more in the comparisons here, but vocals do come just a little bit more forward than they do on the 650. So we'll talk about that here in just a little bit, but not in an objectionable way to my ears at all. Bass is dynamic. It is fun. The extension, the low-end extension, I've already mentioned this, is good, but there is going to be a little bit of a roll-off there in the true deep sub-bass. It does not roll off as aggressively or as quickly as the HD650 does, but it does not have the linear kind of bass extension you can get from a lot of planar driver headphones, or this one. This is the Murph Designs Murph 1, which I lauded its deep bass extension and its $750 open back dynamic driver, which we'll pull that one back out here in a moment for comparisons in a little bit. Okay, but the D1 does not quite catch the Murph 1 there in terms of true deep bass extension, but it's also far from poor. Now, you know I like to use the track Why So Serious from Hans Zimmer as an acid test on bass performance here, and I gotta tell you, the D1 passes the Why So Serious test, okay? You get through that really deep synthesized bass section there, and this bass, it was free of what I will call mechanical noise and distortions. Like, I wasn't noticing any kind of like X-maxing from the drivers moving too far in and out where we're pushing their limits. I'm not hearing any clipping. I wasn't hearing any rattles or anything like that in the sound either. This was one of the cleaner presentations from a dynamic driver headphone around this price I've heard for that track in a while. challenging the Murph on that, right? So this one, I would say, given the performance that I got here at this price, that yes, this passes the Why So Serious test in terms of general cleanliness, pitch definition, articulation, and all of that. The bass here is also well textured. Okay, finger plucks on bass guitar strings come through very clearly. It did a really nice job, convincing job of like resolving the sound of bows being dragged across the strings of upright basses. That deep resonance, okay, kind of sound. Like it sounds zizzy when you hear a bow across a violin string. So just picture a zizzy sound, but with a lower frequency. I don't know, what would that be? Zuzzy? I don't know, I'm just making stuff up now. Okay, but like that was done really well and pulled out really clearly on here as well. So the overall tonality, again, I think is really well done. So congratulations to Head over at that. Like that part of this headphone is excellent. Also excellent are just the technical package that you get for the money here. It's not a cavernously large sound stager by any means. I've definitely heard larger sound stages at this price point and for this type. Okay, the Murph 1 being an example. I also have the HFA Dahlia in for review, which is a little bit more expensive at $9.99, but it's still an open back dynamic, not too far off of this price. It has, again, a much larger soundstage than this one does, but this one, it's not intimate or claustrophobic like, again, the HD650 can be at times. Okay, this one is never like that. The soundstage, it's got a nice size to it. Not huge, not tiny, kind of right down the middle. But for the price, things like imaging and separation and depth and layering, the overall three-dimensionality and holography of the spatial presentation is quite good. Can you get a headphone that does better with like separating out the sounds and more naturally putting space between adjacent instruments and things like that? Sure, you can, but you pay for that privilege, right? At the price, I think this does a pretty bang-up job of that kind of thing as well. The dynamics here are good, maybe not quite class leading, but I never found them lacking either. Bass has a nice punch to it. Because of the slight roll-off in the true deep bass, it doesn't quite follow through with as much slam as I have heard from something that has a little bit more linear deep bass extension to it. But there is still overall pretty good physicality for most music material down in the low end. Okay, snare drums up through the mids have a nice snappiness to them and all that. There is a nice balance between having like an active and energetic sound, but it also not being too forward and aggressive and fatiguing in that presentation either. Okay, so again, well balanced there. Do I really have any sonic complaints here then? Because it sounded pretty good with a wide range of music genres. It did well with heavy metal. It did well with classical. It did well with jazz and hip hop and EDM. And I mean, most music genres sound pretty good on this thing. It's kind of a music genre generalist. Like, if I'm complaining about anything, like these are just like nitpicks, like just maybe a little bit more air to the to the frequency response here. To some, it may still sound a little bit too dark, okay, because of that. But I think that crowd of people will be smaller than those who say find the HD650 too dark in there. So, I mean, it's just, it is a well balanced overall kind of presentation to it there. And I mean, the only thing that I could say is like, okay, is it the most resolving headphone in the world? No. Okay, we shouldn't expect it for $800, but like for $800, the resolution is just fine, if not like near the top of the pack for headphones in this $500 to $1,000 category. Okay, in there, like it's just the texturing and just all of that is again really good here. All right. The complaints that I would have about this headphone, other than you saw that like just keeping it clean with the fuzzies and the oiliness for, you know, all of that can happen to it there. It does just a little bit have a hot ears kind of situation to it here. So if you live in a warmer climate and you are already sensitive to your ears getting hot when you wear a headphone, this one is going to be a little bit of an ear blanket for you. So that's something to keep in mind there too. Like I was just feeling a little bit warm just now here as I was recording this. Again, not a deal breaker in any way for me, just something that you need to be aware of on that. Okay, but a lot to like here. Let's start comparing it to other models then so we can see like how it fits into the market. I'll bring out the Murph 1 again, and I know that not a lot of people have heard the Murph 1 out there, and I reviewed it somewhat recently. So this particular comparison may not be that helpful in terms of the overall sound understanding of the D1, but why do I pull this one out here? Well, when I reviewed the Murph 1, excuse me, I was gushing all over it in its sound, and I called it like probably the best sounding headphone that you've never heard of, right? Because it has like an even more neutral presentation than the D1 does, more of a hint of warmth, where the D1 leans into warmth a little bit more so. The bass extension is really the thing that jumps out about the Murph 1. Like it has this shockingly linear deep bass extension that challenges planar magnetic designs in that ability there. It just digs really, really deep. And in that particular area, it does outperform the D1. The Murph 1 has better deep bass extension than the D1, definitely. The Murph 1 is also a wider sound stage. There's just a bigger overall stage, just a little bit more cavernous in its sound there. That makes its spatial presentation, like the imaging and the separation aspects, stand out a little more just because there's a little bit more room for them to breathe and show off a little bit. But I think these headphones are about even with each other in overall three-dimensionality and holography within their spatial presentation. It's just the Murph 1 does everything a little bit bigger. The Murph 1 also is not as rolled off in the air frequency, so there's a little bit more brightness to it as well, which again, like not overdone at all, but it just makes it sound a little bit closer to true neutral, as I've mentioned there, where it's like more neutral, leaning warm, hint of warmth than this one, which is just like, again, neutral warm. Okay. However, I think the D1 has a little bit smoother treble presentation to it. Some of that sharpness, and then like when the track gets sharp, that the Murph 1 does not have the grace with that the D1 does in there. And I think it also just tends towards sharpness a little bit more generally than the D1 does. But I get the Murph 1 out to show it to you because, like, as I compared it to other headphones that were significantly more expensive and cheaper, I realized that for $750 US with the Murph 1, you were just getting so much headphone for the money. The D1 is right there with the Murph 1 in terms of its overall performance package. And I may not sound as excited about the D1 as I was with the Murph 1. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and listen. Probably only because I heard the Murph 1 first. If I had heard the D1 first, I probably would have been just as excited and thinking, wow, you are really getting a whole lot of headphone for your money here. And that's true because its technical package, while slightly different than what the Murph 1 offers, is absolutely right there with it in overall quality. They're only $50 apart in price and everything, which is more or less the same price when you get up into this range. And so as far as where the D1 fits in the market, it is an excellent value headphone, I think, at $800 US. All right. Now I need to ramble on at length about the comparison to the HD650, or in this case, the 6XX, because that's the variant of the HD650 that I have here on hand to compare to. And so now we're really going to dig into why I say the D1 to my ears is very much a spiritual successor to the 650/6XX. Let's first compare them in terms of their physical comfort and how they feel on the head and that sort of thing. So the biggest thing that stands out, if you're familiar with this Sennheiser HD600 series, is that the clamp force on them is like head in a vice kind of strong. All right, and that's certainly true. Like the 6XX here clamps on my head way harder than the D1 does. This 6XX unit here, I bought back in 2018, okay? Somewhere in that range. Here we are, late 2025. So this unit itself I've had for 7+ years. Okay, and I also did all of the tricks when I first got it about like opening up and like letting it sit over on top of like a bookshelf speaker or something like that to just kind of loosen up its clamp. And while I got it to the point where it's still mostly comfortable for me, I can tell that it's just still clamping down on my head a lot harder than what the D1 does. So if you have found, even with the different tricks to like bend out the headband and stretch it and do all of those kinds of things with the HD600 series, and that still doesn't work for you, the one key difference here is that I think the HEDD is the more comfortable headphone for most people most of the time. Okay, sonic comparisons then get into their overall tone is reasonably close. It was close enough that I started to really wonder and then even asked HEDD the question, did you design the D1 to be the spiritual successor to the 650? They haven't answered yet, so I don't know if that was done on purpose or if it's just the way it worked out. We'll find out there, okay? But the tone was close enough to get there. And why is that? Well, the 6XX gives you, or the 650, gives you that neutral, warm kind of sound. The difference between these two here is in the extremes, though. Well, one difference between them is in the extremes. The D1 has better deep bass extension and a little bit more air presence yet than the 6XX does. And that is even when the 6XX is on a tube amp where the frequency extension, an OTL tube amp anyway, where the frequency extension improves on this headphone over many, but not all, solid-state amplifiers out there. Okay, by the way, I did this sonic comparison of these two on that signal chain I was talking about that had the Shit Mimir DAC and the Shit Asgard X as the primary amplifier there, because I know that the 6XX really lights up on the 1/4-inch output of the 6XX in a way that it does on few other amps, be they tube or solid state or of any price. Okay, so I was using an amp that I knew was friendly to the 6XX to do this comparison here, because I wanted to see what the D1 could do versus the 6XX when the 6XX was singing about as well as it can sing. So that's where I noticed this, like the frequency extension in either direction is a little bit more linear on the D1 than it is on the 6XX. I might as well just wear one of these so I don't have to keep awkwardly holding both of them. Okay, there we go. All right. So that was one key difference. Now, another key difference that I noticed here was in the spatial presentation. The 650/6XX has that reputation for having that 3-blob spatial presentation where there's information on the left, there's information in the center, there's information on the right, but left, center, and left, right, or center, left, and center, right, however you want to talk about that there, they're kind of, well, not there, right? That's why there's 3 blobs. The coherence isn't particularly great. Now, the coherence of the 6XX really improves and becomes pretty good, actually, when the 6XX is powered by that Asgard X. Boy, there's a lot of X's in there. Okay, amplifier from its 1/4-inch output. Okay. This is key, though, because the D1 never sounds 3 blobby to me, regardless of what I was driving it with. Okay, whereas to get the 6XX to not sound 3 blobby, there's a very few amps out there that I've really heard successfully pull that off. So that's one difference here. Even on the Asgard X here, the best that the 6XX could do compared to the D1 was pull even. And it kind of varied on track a little bit, which one I thought had a little bit better spatial separation to it, a little bit more convincing imaging and separation to it. They had very similar soundstage sizes regardless here, which got bigger on the Asgard X than it did on most other amps, okay, for both headphones. But the D1, again, is just more consistent in the accuracy and in the coherence of its spatial presentation over and above the 6XX. and its performance ceiling. If you go up even higher on than the Asgard X, and you go to like the Vio V324, for example, like the D1 becomes more holographic and three-dimensional with better separation, spatial separation, and all of that than the 6XX does. So it scales up higher in that trait as well. The D1, I think, also has slightly more resolution. I mentioned earlier that you hear the sound of bows being dragged across the strings of upright basses more clearly and more accurately through the D1. That's certainly more clear and more accurate than it is on the 6XX there. All right, so the 6XX, I think, does have a little bit more slam to it, or at least a little bit more punch, I should say, particularly in the, through the bass, because again, it rolls off more aggressively than the D1 does in the low end. Okay, so the 6XX is just slightly more hard hitting in the bass ranges where they both have that slight elevation because they both lean into warmth there. But I really would not have noticed that trait if I didn't rapidly switch back and forth between them and was able to listen to one just a few seconds after the other there. Like, I just probably never would have noticed that difference. It's a small enough difference that, again, I had to hear them in rapid succession, I think, to pull that one out. Okay, now I want to come back. There are two things that I want to come more here that I want to talk about, and that is, like I've talked about the treble. The D1's treble presentation is smoother in tone and less prone to sharpness and sibilance than the 6XX does, even though the 6XX rolls off more aggressively in the upper frequencies. The relationship between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics is just a little bit more realistic and convincing yet on the D1. It has a smoothness and a refinement to it from the through the treble over and above what is already pretty strong on the 6XX here. Okay, it is a little bit brighter. Okay, the D1 is just a touch brighter there. So it's not as like warm sounding as the 6XX is in that trait. Okay, but it's also like, it's less piercing, less sibilant, and those tracks that I said earlier that were problematic, like, well, You Ought to Know being an example of one. The 6XX is not as graceful. It gets sharp and fatiguing on those sharp sibilants as the D1 does. So, whereas the 6XX is like, here, there's a problem with your recording, and I'm going to emphasize it, and it's going to bother you. The D1 is like, hey, there's a problem in your recording. I'm going to handle it as best I can. Okay, kind of a thing there to my ears anyway. All right, another difference between the presentations here is going to be in the mid-range. And there's going to be a war on this probably out there as to like which one of these two has the more natural timbre and tone through the vocal range. And it's just going to come down to preference and how your hearing is, because the D1 being just a little bit brighter overall than the 6XX does, which gives it a little bit more crispness and perceived clarity. Okay. You kind of get that, you get that Sennheiser veil with the 6XX. The D1 never sounds veiled. Okay, another difference there, and I think it's coming through this frequency range mostly where this happens. Vocals sound a little bit warmer, thicker, and fuller on the 6XX. They sound a little bit cleaner, crisper, clearer on the D1. So if you prefer your vocals to have a little bit more weight and fullness to them, 6XX. If you like the clarity and cleanliness of it, D1. Okay. But they are still more similar than they are different here. These are just subtle differences in there. And again, overall, the tone and the presentation of the D1 got me asking that question, is this the successor to the HD650? Okay, so like just keep that in mind here. And I've done my best to kind of flesh out how they are similar and how they are different. And I think I've probably rambled on about that enough. Okay, finally, I guess I'll just add, throw in that you've got the proprietary 2-pin connectors for the cabling on the 6XX, and you've got the much more universal dual 3.5 millimeter on the D1. So if you're one of those who buys aftermarket cables, as a lot of us who spend this kind of money on headphones usually are, then you've got that to consider as well. So where does that leave us with the D1? I mean, obviously I like it. I think it's a really good headphone. I mean, to the point where I'm asking the question, is it the spiritual successor to a legendary headphone in the Sennheiser HD650 or the mass drop variant, the HD6XX? And to my ears, yes. I have asked Head whether that's intentional or just something that happened. Either way, to me, it really comes down to, like, if you like the 6XX or there are aspects of it you like, but there are things about it. It clamps too hard. It's a little bit too warm or dark to you. Or it's 300 ohms and it really only sounds its best on either OTL tube amps or more expensive solid state amps, and so you don't have one of those amplifiers, okay? You know, things like that, or it's 3 blob spatial presentation. You don't think you can live with that. You need more 3-dimensionality and holography to your spatial presentation. Well, then the D1 is probably something that you need to look into, because that really is the best way that I can describe the Head D1 here, is that however they did it with the new diaphragm material tech in the, you know, the what did they call it? The thin ply carbon diaphragm, okay? Or is whatever the combination of things that they used, it really does to me sound very much like the HD650, but addressing like what are the commonly complained about shortcomings of that HD650. And then it does it for under $1,000 US. It's $800, okay? And it does it with good resolution and detail and all of that. It's just overall a very good headphone. So I applaud Head for their effort here. It's really good. All right, so, and it gets a strong recommendation from me. All right, so that's going to be my review of the brand new Head D1, Head's first dynamic driver headphone. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, check out my PayPal and my Patreon. Consider becoming a channel member to help support my efforts here. You can also buy future review videos on Patreon individually for either $3 or $5 depending on the video, and if it's a review, you often can get them early and always commercial free. All right, so thanks again everyone for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.